Thank you all for attending today. We're going to cover a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I believe in cyber risk management, not only as a cybersecurity challenge, but an actual business challenge. And it's been a ongoing and ever increasingly challenging problem that businesses have been facing, which is to address the cyber landscape at scale. And at this point in the game, the current methodology has been really, really challenged. We propose a new way to address that. And in this presentation, I aim to get everyone to understand how we intend to pursue it and how we've actually already made a difference. So a little bit of history about me. I started in the industry. It was back in the day. It was actually called InfoSec before it was called cybersecurity. And I had a counterintelligence consultancy that I ran for a number of years. And again, that was a consultancy effort, so I got to see all kinds of sort of horrific situations manifest. It gave me context on exactly what organizations are facing on a consistent basis, and I watched the evolution of the problem over those years. In 2010, I took that experience and I tried my hand at building a product, and I spun the product out via a different company called Untitled. And what we were doing at Untitled was sinkholing at scale. And it was a new and sort of innovative way of approaching the problem, which is to sort of collect all that we could as far as knowledge of who was victimized by malware, specifically in that time frame. We were successful in our effort. We ended up being acquired by Mandiant in 2012. We became a sub-product in Mandiant and also helped lead a lot of their intelligence efforts that led to a lot of notable discoveries for them. Mandiant was then obviously acquired by FireEye. I left shortly before that actually happened. Took some time to sort of pontificate new challenges, settled into something that really seemed to have no good solution, which was the supply chain problem for organizations, and pursued an angle that I thought would be very unique. Could we utilize similar methodologies and philosophies that we had at Unbalance and Mandiant that would give us really interesting telemetry on who was victimized, but use new technology and new methods 10 years plus later. And that was the impetus and the genesis of Prevailion, which I founded in 2018. So the challenge effectively was understanding how organizations and security practitioners face the problem today. And if you look at the slide on screen right now, it sort of illustrates four main issues that feed to a greater problem, which is the top, which is the lack of visibility into third-party vulnerabilities. And by the way, when I originally intended to start this on supply chain, I realized it wasn't just supply chain, it was the greater problem of third-party risk as a whole. So this includes everything from literally your manufacturers and vendors, but also your customers and your partners and your JV partners, or even possibly application or software development houses that may be involved with your organization that you haven't necessarily achieved good visibility into. And the reason for that is that starting from sort of the lower left of this, the castle and moat strategy, which is the age-old effort of building a taller, thicker wall and building a moat around your environment, has effectively failed. And part of the reason for that is that the perimeter of an organization has changed. It effectively has become ephemeral. It is now all the organizations that you work with, their perimeter becomes your perimeter, and then their perimeter and then their organizations they work with become that extended perimeter yet again. So effectively, the weakest link now becomes the vector of infection for the adversary to get in and then laterally move to where they eventually want to get to. So that really has sort of invalidated the nature of saying I can insulate myself with a really good security practice. It helps. It's not to suggest that they need to do away with that effort, but it's certainly just not enough at this point. That coupled with an overabundance of data, and I'm talking about literally the IOC deluge that exists today, which is an immense amount of information facilitated by an incredible number of tools that provide false positives, provide a non-prioritized approach to what they should be looking at, and they being the security practitioners and teams of these organizations, and the risk officers of these organizations as well now, because they're tasked with a cyber problem. And so that's a real problem here with understanding exactly what is most critical at this point for you to pursue. There's just too many things to sort of look at a time. The point in time challenge is something that we've noted as one of the most critical things that organizations face, which is that they understand that at this given moment, perhaps there's vulnerabilities and exploitability potential, but it's right now. It's literally the pen test conundrum. I know exactly what might be vulnerable right this minute, but 5 minutes from now, I may not know exactly what the status is, and I have to then be vigilant and try to stay up to speed with a good cadence on checking. That's a challenge. We need something that's much more continuous, and I'll get to that in subsequent slides. And then really, I've already said this a couple times, but the lack of time and strategic focus by executives in IT is really kind of the crux of it. And you layer on top of that all of the other third-party ecosystems that exist that they now have to worry about, and they don't even have visibility into. It becomes insurmountable and daunting. And that really is where cyber risk has become something that a lot of organizations have sort of thrown their hands up in the air going, well, we'll just hope for the best at this point. The challenge with things like snapshots and risk scores is that they do provide a challenging situation. I don't have it on the slide, but I do want to bring it up, and that's that they do provide a false sense of security, or they can be a bit alarmist. So those are both diametrically opposite things, but they become the same problem, which is you're either sending someone on a wild goose chase suggesting that they really have more problems than they really do, or they don't catch something and then they provide some sort of sense of, well, I guess nothing's there, so we're fine, or we patched everything up and everything's great. And then they're also based on a lot of snapshot and time analysis. So that's either some sort of analysis of the perimeter of the organization that they know about to suggest that there's vulnerability or exploitability at that moment, or it's surveys or questionnaires of the teams that they're assessing, and they're getting the best knowledge to date that that team may have. And that's, of course, again, very subjective, and that's challenging. It also indicates a potential and not actual problem, which is something that's really concerning. What I mean by that is that vulnerability is something that's bad, but it's not quite manifested into something that's a real problem quite yet. It's not good, it's bad hygiene, but it's certainly not something that's going to put someone on the front page of a newspaper per se. What will is when that exploitability or vulnerability is leveraged by a bad actor, and now that organization is impacted, and they now have to face the music of suggesting they are now compromised because they didn't manage a patch of some kind. And actual is indeed something that really is more critical in nature. The other thing that the risk scores don't provide is any kind of context on the threat actor initiative or campaign intent. And what I mean by that is it may be that there's an identification of a malware type that's now manifested in an environment, but where did it come from, and who's really sort of facilitating this? Is it a spray and pray effort? Is it something very targeted? Is it something that's very industry focused? Without that context, you don't really know what you're facing. It's not that it's any better, but having that context helps with a lot of things. When you have to do a breach disclosure, there's a hell of a lot of information you're going to need to share with your stakeholders to give them comfort that there is a knowledge of what's going on. And so that's a big part of that effort. Slow and intrusive. You, as an organization facing sort of this sort of scoring methodology, the organization that is doing that scoring has to point their crosshairs at your organization's perimeter to do an analysis, or scan or scrape the deeper dark web to sort of find that information, effectively go fishing and hope for a good day of fishing and collect that intelligence. It's a boiling the ocean approach to the problem. And further, it's even worse because it's intrusive. It requires a probing effort into the organization, which really is disruptive, and in a lot of cases can actually disrupt the business operations of the actual organization they're attempting to provide analysis to. And that's a real problem. And that feeds directly into the last point here, which is nothing standardized about this, which is a real challenge. There may be some good compliance efforts that are underway, but it doesn't really support anything around saying, well, we did this methodically and it's exactly the same thing as this standard over here with another organization. So one organization may say something completely different than the other, and what's a customer to believe at that point when one score is 10 and another score is 3, and they're technically using the same methodology as according to their marketing material. So very challenging. What we propose is a new paradigm shift, effectively, which is that instead of living in this defensive analyze your perimeter, understand exactly what's going on with it, try to defend further, build that thicker, taller, more robust wall. What we propose is a fundamentally different shift in the approach, which is to go offensive. And what I mean by that is, let's start looking at the adversary's efforts. Let's understand their motivations. Let's understand where they are. Let's understand how they're building infrastructure out to collect the payloads that are actually being harvested by these victims. And in doing so, we're able to then attribute further. We're able to collect and understand exactly what the motivations are. And we're also able to instill some level of concern and fear into the adversary to some degree, where they may limit what they do. Right now, they're pretty cavalier. They have no reason to stop what they're doing because, frankly, they're anonymized. It's scalable. It's cost effective. No reason to stop. If we can provide an impact there and give that information and put the power back in the hands of the actual victims, that changes the power dynamic almost instantly when it comes to this. And by definition, that's exactly what compromised intelligence is. It's literally the information around exactly what the adversary has achieved, where they are, how they're doing it, the frequency, the cadence, the velocity of that compromise. And with that information and intelligence, customers can be armed to actually take action in a much more effective way. And further to that, it's continuous. The fact that we're able to provide an ability to say, hey, here's something that actually happened, and here's a history of exactly how much it's happened, and here's how it appears to continue to go on, or every indication is that it's going to go in this direction, provides a lot of preemptive knowledge that an organization presently doesn't have. Some of the ways that we differ, because threat intelligence, and I've watched this sort of manifest over the last 10, 15 years, threat intelligence is a broad category. Everyone's heard of it. Everyone probably consumes it in one fashion or another. A lot of organizations actually produce it themselves through their tool sets. Case in point, our first slide where we talked about tool sprawl. Problem with it is that it's diluted, it's bloated, it's full of false positives. It's based fundamentally on some sort of classic signature anomaly analysis of regular traffic. Let's ingest everything, and then let's pick through it to figure out what actually is malicious and what's benign and put them in two different piles. And the ones that look suspicious we'll put in the center and shovel over to our A teams for further analysis. Worked for a while until there was an immense amount of data to where there was no way you could build a big enough team to actually go through all of it. So that's a real problem. What we're suggesting with compromised intelligence is get the actual known signal of compromise and truly malicious traffic versus all traffic, and then sift through that. So start with the smaller and go to even more refined and focused versus starting huge and go to somewhat understood to be, suspicious. So that's where they've ended. We're sort of starting where that ends and saying, let's go in and go into a deeper dive to saying this is definitively malicious in some way. Let's confirm whether or not this is a security researcher. Let's confirm it's the sandbox. We'll scrub those out, but everything else then remains as almost a false positive free data set of known compromise. Seeing the dynamic nature of compromise is another key differentiator here. I mentioned this earlier, which is that we do get to see the frequency, the velocity, and I love the word magnitude because in that we are sitting at the adversarial point of view, we're collecting at that level, we get to see all of the victimology associated with that effort. And we do that without looking for it. And what I mean by that is that when a tool is deployed by an adversary, tool being a piece of malware or some other kind of malicious software, and it beacons back to its home, if you will, or its command and control, that's where we're sitting to effectively collect all of the victimology associated with that. So it's a completely opposite way of approaching the collection mechanism that other organizations have been doing to get their threat intel in place today. And that feeds directly to my third point here, which is everything today is effectively an indicator. It's something that's suspiciously concerning, but not confirmed. Compromised intelligence provides enough context to actually sort of turn those IOCs into EOCs that we're terming, which is basically the evidence of compromise, to say that this is now confirmed. We have all of the telemetry to back that up. You can actually run with confidence with this and actually pursue it. And it helps organizations do a number of things: prioritization, severity ratings, understanding that this is something I need to pursue versus this. Give me some context. And that's exactly what organizations have been asking for. And so the shift is actually happening. And it's an interesting shift because as we've seen the industry progress over time, there's been iterations of the same types of products over and over again. What we're proposing is something fundamentally different again. We're moving from a threat intelligence sort of bloated, over inundated model to something very refined, very focused, which is compromise intelligence. We're moving from IOCs to EOCs. We're moving from a perimeter defense, which again, we've sort of nullified as there is no actual perimeter anymore because of the nature of the connectivity that exists today, to continuous compromise intelligence. We're going from a potential problem to knowledge of an actual situation going on. So vulnerability to compromise. Victim-centric, let's stop looking at our perimeters and trying to whack-a-mole the whole situation to something saying, let's go exactly where the adversaries are collecting this information from and view it from that perspective to the victims. And that actually helps us get a truly confirmed data set from the beginning, which is a key point of our value prop. Reactive is very much what the security industry's been. We are proposing a preemptive approach to it right now, which is that if you know a third party is in your ecosystem that has a horrific infection of some kind that is likely contagious to you, and there's a VPN connectivity between you and that partner, be preemptive about limiting your exposure to them. And compromise intelligence can provide that context. Scorecards, again, point in time, everything we talked about to now truly continuous insights. Get perspective in real time and then look at the histogram and the consistency of that organization's success or failure over time. And that'll give you much more of an understanding of exactly how the organization is doing. It's not just about their security operation, it's about their entire management effort and their protocol and their policies. It may indeed be more of a change management effort than it is a security need. And that's something that we've seen over and over again with organizations. Getting a little bit more interesting here, we're suggesting moving from a conventional approach to an asymmetric approach. And the asymmetric approach is indeed what the adversaries have been doing with us all along. They've had all the abilities in the world to fail numerous times and succeed once and have a win, versus us literally having the ability to never fail and fail once and lose completely. And we're trying to shift that dynamic here into something much more asymmetric. And ultimately, this all boils into moving from a risk management approach to a truly compromise management approach, which is that if you know an ecosystem around you is compromised, manage it effectively. Some of the use cases around it, there's an immense amount, as you probably imagine now, because when you're able to work with confirmed evidence of compromise about just about any organization you're curious about, it gives a lot of latitude to work with. The obvious first one is understanding new relationships. Say you're an organization looking to partner or work with a new ecosystem partner of some kind, a vendor, a supplier, getting an understanding of exactly how that organization is faring from a compromise standpoint could tip the scale very quickly in one direction or the other. Either it'll give you confirmation you're dealing with a best-in-class organization, and for all intents and purposes, this organization looks very, very good to work with, let's go with it, versus, wow, I just looked at 6 months of this organization's status of compromise, and the last thing we need to do is put any level of connectivity between us and them, even so much as an email. So very, very key point for how organizations can preemptively vet vendors and solution providers before they engage and potentially expose themselves to infectious networks. Another interesting part here is because of the nature of how compromise intelligence is collected, you can look at the ecosystems of your ecosystem. So think of it as a dartboard where you've got the center bullseye, which is you, and you've got all these concentric rings. Each of those rings represent a third, fourth, fifth party away from you. So it's the partners of your partners of your partners. If you're able to see an impending compromise move laterally in toward the center of the bullseye, the tempest is on the horizon, and you can preempt that very quickly by having that visibility on tap, so to speak. Existing third-party ecosystem, very obvious. This gets into knowing exactly what's going on with your actual third-party ecosystem, ones that now you've already engaged with that you need to go vet and say, okay, well, I know they passed their compliance audits. Let me see if they are actually clean. So this gets a little bit more granular into the key point here. And then classic use case here is to look at yourself. Understand if you've got something in there, and the value of reducing that dwell time of that adversary in your environment is gold. Any ability to reduce the amount of time some nefarious actors inside your environment is worth an immense amount. From a reputational standpoint to an IP standpoint, you name it. It becomes a tremendous value. Interesting case study, and we're really grateful to Matt for allowing us to share the story here. So the Southeastern Illinois Electric Cooperative is a customer of Prevailion. He has tremendous concerns about his network of over literally 1,200 vendors. And literally with a few clicks, he's able to add those vendors into the platform and keep a consistent watch on them. So at any point when there's a status change with them, he's able to very, very quickly take action. And that action is very, very subjective. It is a very risk tolerance based scenario, and it's based on policy. There's a lot of organizations that can't afford to truly stop working with those organizations. We get that, we understand that. But at least at this point, he knows exactly where he needs to be vigilant. And that's a key thing for him. And it also helps him in the same use cases before, where if he's vetting new possible vendors, he can actually look at them preemptively before he connects them to the VPN. So it's a key value add for him. He's literally found nothing like it, and it's supplied him with a tremendous amount of comfort going forward. Prevailion, as I mentioned, founding not too terribly long ago now, has shifted the market fundamentally. I mean, we're truly there to sort of change the nature of how organizations view their ecosystems. We're shifting it from saying, look, you maybe can get some sense of how well they're doing from a hygiene perspective, from a vulnerability and exploitability perspective, but do you know if they're infected? Do you know if they're potentially contagious? Because there is a direct line of access between you and them. And the first group that knows that that's happening is the adversaries. They're the ones that are doing the homework. They're the ones with the topographies of these ecosystems. And they're going to find those singular focused organizations that are shared among a series of organizations. So that one hit and that one access point gives them access to a number of different targets very quickly. Most importantly, Prevailion does this without any kind of hardware, software, or configuration change. And I know I sort of alluded to this through the presentation, but literally the intelligence is already in our platform. It's a matter of access, and that's how quickly and easily this is available to customers. Some of our stats, and this is pretty exciting and concerning at the same time. This is a 30-day snapshot of exactly what we're seeing statistically. We see and collect approximately 100 million plus beacons every single day. And those are indeed communications from entities to command and control that we are effectively in front of collecting the information on. That is coming from over 80,000 different entities. Now that includes IP addresses, organizations, countries. We're not a globally specific, capability. Wherever that manifestation of malware exists, we will see it come in to the endpoint. Once we scrub and reduce down in a 30-day period, we see approximately 350 confirmed malicious events. And what I mean by that, those are now confirmed actual malware deployments by an adversary into an environment, communicating back, delivering payloads to command and control. And that's a reduced down from sandboxes, other security researchers testing, scanners, probes, things like that are hitting the C2s unwittingly. So it's a pretty stifling thing. And to add a little more insult to injury as far as the information on how much we're actually going to see, in the next 2 to 3 months, that 100 million beacons collected daily will jump up to somewhere between 1 to 1.2 billion beacons a day. And this has to do with our infrastructure build out. So the sad truth is that's a fraction of actually what is actually going on with the industry and the world today as far as compromise. Real testament to how scary it is out there with how the false sense of security organizations have about their environment. And with that, I close and look forward to some of the questions and answers you guys may have.
Thank you, Karim. We have received a number of great questions, so we can go ahead and get started on the Q&A.
Sure.
The first question is, how fast can Prevailion identify and access new threats?
So the beauty of this is that as soon as we're able to understand the command and control infrastructure of a given threat, and that is a matter of analysis, and again, I'll move it into actual stats here, hours to minutes to hours, and we have visibility into the C2 infrastructure for it, we can understand who's victimized by a threat within hours of collecting that information. So from knowledge of a new problem and something that's brought to our awareness, a matter of hours later inside the platform, there can be availability of who's victimized by that threat. So this isn't we don't have to fixate on something to then go pursue it. We just simply look for the infrastructure and impact it, and that's part of our secret sauce, and then deliver that intelligence back via the platform.
Great. The next question, who is Prevailion's competition?
That's a great question. Presently, we don't have a definitive direct competitor. There is certainly a perceived competitive landscape around third-party analysis and assessments. On one side, there is a perceived competitor on some of the adversarial disruption companies that are starting to manifest. There's also some misaligned thought that we might be an asset discovery organization, kind of the likes of like a Bit Discovery or an Expanse or someone along those lines, which we think do a great job of understanding what the assets are and the edges are of these organizations, but we don't do that. At this stage in the game, there's pretty much no one like us. As far as providing value, certainly helping organizations understand a little bit about their vulnerabilities and exploitabilities back to the scorecard companies, that's the closest thing at this stage in the game that organizations can get to understand how they're faring. But at this stage, we're a completely huge shift in dynamics, and so no competitors. Short answer.
Okay. Next question. How can you dynamically get the IP addresses or ranges of an entire supplier network, especially if I want to go, say, 6 tiers deep?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, and kind of tying back to the answer I said in this last question, we're not doing asset discovery. We're not out there scraping and looking for organizational footprint. We will do a run through of looking at what the connectivity is of an organization to others, but that's still us surmising it. No one knows it better than the actual customers themselves. So in the case of, for example, the Southeastern Illinois Electric Cooperative, they will literally collect the IP spaces of the organizations they know they're interfacing with and put those into the system for analysis. And what that means is as soon as you're able to understand the IP ranges yourself, you select a view of those. We're not out there doing the analysis for you, not because of anything other than the fact that we feel that you're going to know it better than we will. Now, we'll do a quick run through of attribution of this IP belongs to this organization, or this cloud IP belonged to this organization, now it belongs to a new one. But as far as understanding and building out the top, I'll call them topographic maps or taxonomies, we don't do that.
Okay. And next question is, can Prevailion provide trending intelligence in terms of threat actors by industry?
Yes, we can. Presently, what we're doing is bucketing the victims into silos that allow us to understand exactly, oh, wow, these are all financial organizations that seem to be tied together. Interestingly enough, each question is leading back to the former one. Once we're able to see some of these victims and the linkages between them, that does give us some context on exactly who's connected to whom. But we're far from having a full map of that, but it certainly does give us some visibility into that. But yes, we do have our information organized and siloed in that capacity where it is industry, sector, subsector, organization, and then IP to take it from high level to granular.
Okay.
And based on threat too, I'm sorry, that was the question.
Next question is, could you speak more about how Prevailion works beneficially with resellers as noted in the second tier of the 4-tier infographic?
Certainly. So in that we're an intelligence source and a proprietary one at that, resellers and other service providers benefit tremendously from what we have. They're able to understand exactly which organizations are worth pursuing in terms of helping them with their challenges. We work in close cooperation with organizations to sell other security products and suites of products that might help limit that exfiltration and beaconing. Same goes for IR and incident response. We can certainly work with those organizations to support that. Now, in a more classic reseller model, we still prefer to work with groups like MSSPs groups that can actually have an impact with the intelligence that we provide. In that we're not an actual security organization. We're not doing security on behalf of the victims. We'd like to work with those groups that actually can facilitate that.
Okay. Thank you, Karim. We are at the end of the time. And so if we didn't get to your question today, we will follow up with you directly and provide you an answer. And so on behalf of Prevailion, we'd like to thank you again for your time and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.